Did you have a chance to talk to NMC?
Hello. Hello there, Birdie. How are you?
Fine. Are you in Somerset?
No, I'm in Wheaton.
Aha. This is gonna be a very big Zoom.
Oh, really?
Well, I guess so. I thought it was for my little town of Somerset. You know, I'm right between Friendship Heights and Bethesda.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm speaking.
Ah, okay.
Yes,
A pleasure to meet you.
it's a pleasure to meet you too. So I'm sure
Okay.
that
I see my mayor is, at least I see his study. Yes, Jeffrey's not there yet. Jeffrey's going to be mayor for life here.
And I didn't want, so she gave a presentation. The level of knowledge. And some layers. Oh, Kim, did you get Michelle Obama to come?
Wouldn't that be great?
Did you invite her?
I wish I knew her. Are you kidding?
Well, you could just send a note to her house. Everybody knows her address.
Well, I guess I'm not everybody, Jeffrey. So I don't know her address.
Okay. Well, it's public information. Okay. So my question is, so your last name is pronounced Prasad, right?
Correct.
Okay. And do you want to be Kimblin or Kim?
Whenever you said it perfectly. So whatever you're comfortable with, I'm good.
Okay. So, Mr. Town Manager, don't forget to put who you are and put something as to, and put Naomi's last name. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Okay, so you know Matt, our town manager, don't you?
I don't. Nice to meet you, Matt.
Yes.
And we have,
I know Kim.
We are part of we are co-owners, I guess, of, you know what MMC, it's not, you know what MMC TV is, right? The Montgomery Municipal Channel. So
Yes.
they're recording this for the channel, right?
Okay.
Correct. That's correct.
Hi, Melissa. Do you know everybody?
Hi.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
So Matt is going to, should we put Naomi, Vice President of the Chevy Chase West Neighborhood Association?
No, I'm not any longer.
Okay, what do we want to put you as? Okay, so what am I supposed to introduce? Are you a member of the Implementation Advisory Committee for the Bethesda Downtown Plan?
I am and past co-chair.
Okay, and then I'm going to say that you're the former Vice President of the Chevy Chase West Neighborhood.
Former, right.
Okay, so Matt, I believe that Naomi and Kim both have PowerPoints.
Great.
No, I
Okay.
don't have a PowerPoint.
What do you have? You don't have.
I'm just talking. I don't have
Okay,
a
cool.
PowerPoint.
Okay, I forgot. Okay, and there's the distinguished Gwen Wright.
Hi, Gwen.
So you're gonna put okay, panel. Okay, that's good. Panelist is good. And don't forget, and may I introduce Councilmember Debbie Heller,
Hi, Debbie.
our newly elected council member who's had a number of leadership positions in the town,
Right,
powerful ones.
yeah,
So-
very,
So is Melissa, are you going to be able to we were hoping to have just the panel on the screen.
So,
Good
Can
idea.
you do that?
who are the panelists? Is everybody here?
Gwen, Naomi, Kim, and we're waiting for Rob Goldman.
Okay, so the only, normally I record in speaker view, so we really only see who's speaking at the time. But if you want all of the panelists on at the same time, I can record in gallery view, but that means everyone that is not a panelist needs to turn their camera off.
Okay, well, Matt can make that request. And then also, we need the council members also on the screen. Is that possible?
If their cameras are all on, then it will be whoever has their camera on is going to be what's on the screen.
I
Do you-
can make an announcement and I'll stop people's videos before we get started.
Yeah, you can.
We're also disabling the chat so that there won't be any annoyances, because it's sort of when the stuff pops up, it changes people's train of thought. And then the way we're doing it, which I think I had mentioned before, is that, and I think I need to call Rob Goldman. So what the format is that each of the panelists will make a presentation. And then, and you saw the order, Gwen, Naomi, Rob, and then Kim. And then after that, I will call on the council members to ask questions. And then after that, any question that a member of the audience has, they will write it to the town manager in the chat, and then he will ask the questions. Because we want to make sure they're not duplicated questions. And we also don't, we appreciate your time, and we don't, there's Rob Goldman. So Matt, I think that you understand all the format, and so once at 7 o'clock when we start, I'll let you explain all that and what people should do.
Perfect.
And I do want to thank Melissa and company from Montgomery Municipal Channel for their help, their ongoing help, and their particular help tonight. And I think it's wonderful that this will be available on the channel too, so that many, many people can obtain this vital information that's going to be imparted tonight.
Definitely. Jeffrey, can I ask you a quick question? So normally what I put on air for the channel is speaker view, who's speaking at the time. Do you want on air the panelists and the council members, or you just want people to only be able to see the participants that are joining you tonight to only be able to see the panelists and the council, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if everyone puts their sets their Zoom up so that they're seeing gallery view, and if only the panelists and the council members have their camera on, that is exactly what they'll see. But for our purposes, I will record the speaker view, whoever is just speaking at the time.
Okay.
Does that make
great.
sense?
Does that make sense, Mr. Manager?
I think so. I'm going to.
So the other question I have is, what will happen if someone comes on after the instructions have been given out? Will Matt be able to chat with them?
So Matt, you should be able to click on the more button next to their name and choose, you'll either have you should be able to stop their video.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, well, I note that the time is past 7 o'clock, so I think we are ready to begin. And before we begin our Somerset Thrive Montgomery 2050 Forum, I will turn it over to our town manager to read the disclaimer and then also to explain how everybody can help us produce an excellent video.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to our panelists who have joined us this evening. Thank you to the council members as well who are have helped put on this event. Just a reminder to everybody before we begin that this forum is being recorded, and so we'll post it on the town's website, and it will also be recorded for Montgomery Municipal Cable to post on their website and television station. If for whatever reason we get interrupted in a way that doesn't allow us to continue, I'll end the meeting and send out new instructions so we can begin anew. But to avoid interruptions, I have limited the chat function so that people can directly chat with me and send me a question. There will be a Q&A portion of the event, so that along with using the raise hand function will allow me to moderate the questions and ask them on your behalf of our esteemed panel. So feel free to chat with me, send me any questions that come up that you might have for our panel. And thank you for joining us.
And do you want to put in the request about the members of the audience to please?
Yes. So if everybody puts on gallery view, you'll be able to see our current council as well as our panelists who I have identified with a panelist moniker. And I will stop your video so that our panel is the focus of it, as much as we love to see all of your smiling faces.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we're now ready to begin. And I, again, in joining with our town manager, want to thank everyone on our panel. I want to thank, of course, our council members for being here and for also the many of you from the audience, from our residents that are here tonight for this very important information gathering session on the Thrive Montgomery 2050 plan. So the way we're going to operate tonight is we are first going to hear from our 4 panelists, and then I will call on the council members in order to ask questions of the panel afterward. And then following that, any questions that anybody in the audience, our residents have, please write it to Matt and he will then ask those questions. And that's so we make sure that all the questions get answered and that there are no duplications. So tonight, our 4 panelists are Gwen Wright, who is the director of the Montgomery County Planning Department of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. I'm giving all the formal titles tonight. We have Naomi Spinrad, our neighbor up the street, who is the former vice president of the Chevy Chase West Neighborhood Association and member, I think she's past co-chair of the Implementation Advisory Committee for the Bethesda Downtown Sector Plan. I hope I got that right, Naomi. We have Mr. Robert Goldman, who lives nearby, and he is the president and CEO of one of the leading affordable housing nonprofits in the county, Montgomery, Making Home Possible, which used the former Montgomery Housing Partner. Isn't that right, MHP? Yeah, Montgomery Housing Partnership. He's going to talk. And then after that, we have our friend Kim Prasad, the founder of EPIC, Empowering People and Communities of MoCo. She's also president of the Wheaton Regional Park Neighborhood Association and a former chair of 9 districts for MoCo. And she knows quite a bit about this topic. So with that, I will turn it over to Gwen Wright.
So thank you very much for inviting me to join you this evening. I wanted to mention that also on the call in the background is Khalid Afzal, who is our project manager for Thrive Montgomery, and who will, I'm sure, be correcting me if I say anything in error at all. Khalid is the one who knows it all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully I am able to do this effectively. Let's give it a try. Okay, does everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Great. So here today to talk about Thrive Montgomery 2050. I know that some of you are going to have questions on a separate project called the Attainable Housing Strategies Project. And I have some slides at the very end about that. But I wanted to start with the work on Thrive Montgomery. What is Thrive Montgomery? Well, it's an update to our general plan, which was last comprehensively updated in 1969. Many people know our general plan as the Wedges and Corridors Plan. It was really a landmark plan in the field of planning. We won a National American Planning Association award for the fact that this was a landmark plan that really changed the course of the planning profession. It's a long-range vision for the future growth of the county. It is a policy document. I want to emphasize that it does not change zoning in any neighborhood in the county. The master plans that you all are probably familiar with, like the Bethesda master plan, are followed by something called a sectional map amendment, which is where zoning is actually changed. This is not a document that changes zoning. It is a policy document. It will guide, however, future county policies, future master plans, planning for infrastructure, planning for community amenities, and private development. So I thought I would just step back to try again to emphasize what is a general plan. And these quotes are actually from the general plan from the 1960s. I should mention that in 1993, there was an update to the goals and objectives, but not a full-blown rewriting of the general plan. So this is the first full-blown rewriting of the plan in close to 60 years. Again, I think this describes it well. I'm not going to read these quotes out loud to you, but I want to just emphasize that it talks about overall policies for development of what's called the regional district, which is both Montgomery and Prince George's counties. And there will be follow-up detailed master plans that will come about, that will go through all the same steps in a regular master plan, the same outreach, the same discussions that will be looked at in the context of this general plan, but those are follow-up steps. To give you an idea, again, of sort of how a general plan works, In the 1969 plan, there was a general policy discussion about increasing affordable housing. That was in 1969, and it wasn't until the early 1970s, I can't remember if it was 73 or 74, that we in the county actually enacted a moderately priced dwelling unit program. So the goal, the idea, the policy was discussed in the 1969 plan. The actual legislation to do something about that policy happened, 6 or 7 years later. Protecting farmland, that was a big thrust of the Wages and Corridors plan. But it was not until 1980 that we enacted our functional plan for the preservation of agriculture and rural open space, which created our transfer of development rights program and created the agricultural reserve that we know today. So that took, 15 years to actually enact after the plan. Guiding timely infrastructure. Again, it wasn't until the early 70s that we created an adequate public facilities ordinance, APFO. The goal, the policy, the idea was conceived of in the general plan, but the actual legislation that enacted it happened afterwards. So again, I use these as examples to sort of say the idea of a general plan is to lay out the goals and policies, but not to actually enact legislation or to enact zoning changes. Many people have asked, why are we updating the general plan right now? Well, what we want to be clear about is that Thrive Montgomery 2050 is not about reinvention. It's about adapting to realities and shifting the way we think about how the county should grow. We are facing changes. It's not the plan driving change. Change has happened, and we are responding because of that change. There have been economic disruptions, social change, demographic shifts, technological innovations, and climate change. The plan that you see in the sort of shades of brown and gold on the left is the 1964 plan, and it shows, as you can see, one corridor in Montgomery County with corridor cities along that corridor. But really what we've evolved into is more what you see on the right, which is a web of interconnected corridors with multiple centers. And what we're trying to do in this plan is recognize that reality, that we have multiple corridors and multiple centers, not just I-270. Some of the change that we're dealing with, that we're trying to respond to, and again, it's not that we're making this change, we're responding to the change, is that our Council of Governments forecasts show that we're going to have about 200,000 more residents by the year 2045. We have a built-out county for the most part. There's only about 15% of the land that is totally unconstrained. And we consider constraints things like parks, the ag reserve, existing development, including single-family neighborhoods, commercial shopping centers. So those all exist in the county. There's very, very little just raw land left. The other thing that's happened in the county is an enormous demographic shift. What you see on the left is not from the 60s, it's from 1990. In 1990, the dark blue represents white predominant neighborhoods. The only neighborhood, the light blue is white majority. The yellow is no predominant group. What you see on the right is 2016. And you can see the changes in the county from white predominant and white majority, which are the blue colors, to yellow, which is no predominant group, again, that's actually pretty interesting because you've probably seen some information in the news about how Montgomery County, when they look at the most diverse communities in the United States, we have, I believe, 3 of the top communities in the entire country in terms of true diversity. No majority, but a truly diverse mix of residents. We do have some communities that are Hispanic majority, Black majority, Black predominant, but really, I think the biggest change is just that we have become an enormously diverse place. We're also an increasingly older population, and that has a lot of benefits. We have some very well-educated, very active, very participatory folks who are 65 and older, but there also is a greater need for different kinds of community services, and we see that increasing to the point where in 2040 we expect 21% of our population to be over 65. We also, as you can see from this chart, and some of you may have seen this chart in other forms, we are lagging in building the amount of housing that is needed to house our projected population. You can see that in the 80s and even into the 90s, we had a lot more housing being produced each year. We had a big drop during the Great Recession of 2008, and we've had a drop certainly during the last couple of years. But if we're going to meet the housing targets of, and in fact, again, some of you may have heard, we've been working with Council of Governments on this on a regional basis. If we're going to meet the housing targets to house the people who are projected to come, and on those projections, I do want to say we've been slowly but surely getting our census data in, and our projections are pretty much on target in terms of overall population growth. So that 200,000 number we think is a very real number. We do need to increase the amount of housing to house the people who are coming. And we need to take a look at our land use patterns. In essence, we have over 70% of the county in either agriculture, parks, open space, or single family housing. You can see on the chart how little of the county is multifamily housing, under 2%. We are very fortunate that we have a county that has so much green space, that has wonderful neighborhoods, that has parks, that has agriculture. But we are going to have to think differently as we grow in the future, because we have people coming, and again, close to 80%, between 70 and 80% of the county dedicated to just a couple of uses. So when we undertook thinking about Thrive, we did some outreach. We thought about what people find most of interest, the things that they believe are big goals that we have to achieve in the county. And those became our 3 overarching goals, the 3 big outcomes that we want to have in Thrive: environmental resilience, economic health, and community equity. We went back and looked at all the research and studies we've been doing for the last few years. We had, so again, THRIVE is actually, again, not a lot of new information. It's the culmination of a lot of studies and work that has been going on for at least the last 10 plus years. We've studied our office market. We've studied our rental housing market. We've looked at meeting the housing needs of older adults in Montgomery County. We've done a whole range of different kinds of housing studies. We've looked at retail. We've looked at co-location of public facilities. And in January of 2019, we did a very, very detailed report called Montgomery County Trends, which laid out data on trends in a wide range of areas in the county that have been going on for the last 25 years. It was a real check-in on where have we been over the last 25 years and what are the trends going forward. All of those studies, all of that information contributed to THRIVE. The other thing that's interesting about THRIVE is what a lot of communities do, and honestly, it's interesting, almost all the jurisdictions in the surrounding area have done updates to their general plans or are in the process of doing updates to their general plans. And the vast majority of those organizations hire a consultant and turn the whole project essentially over to a consultant to do the outreach, to do the writing, to do the presentations before the appointed and elected officials. We made a conscious decision not to do that. We made a conscious decision to pull our excellent planning staff into the process in a grassroots way and have a series of, I think it was about 8 working groups with 60 planners involved, looking at topics related to THRIVE. We organized a technical advisory group of 27 representatives from county, state, and regional agencies. We worked closely with the Maryland State Office of Planning. We worked closely with executive branch agencies. We had many briefings to our interagency department heads. That's Department of Permitting Service, Department of Transportation, Department of Environmental Protection. At the planning board, we had 9 briefings, a public hearing with 85 speakers and 10 work sessions. For the Fed committee and council, we did 5 briefings before ever even bringing the project forward. They had 2 public hearings with 91 speakers. It says 2 work sessions so far. I think we're actually up to 4 at this point, and we're going on 5. We had nearly 200 meetings with the community. We did online surveys and quizzes. We sent meeting in a box postcards to over 1,000 HOAs and community associations. We sent 91,000 postcards to equity emphasis areas, inviting people to participate and provide input. We, of course, used our web-based tools, videos, e-letter. Our estimate is when we started our outreach, which was in June of 2019, about 2.5 years ago. Since that time, we've probably had about 12,000 individuals who have provided us with input on THRIVE. So let's talk about how THRIVE is organized. It's really in 6 chapters, and the chapters build on each other. Our intent in these chapters was to integrate those core objectives, those core outcomes of economy, equity, and environment into every part of the plan. And actually, in our work that we're doing with the council and the Fed committee now, they are actually helping us and making some great suggestions about how to even make that clearer and to identify clearly which recommendations relate to equity, which recommendations relate to economy, which recommendations relate to environment. The first 3 chapters lay out the foundation of what we're recommending and seeing as the county's growth at 3 different scales. Compact growth is the first chapter, and it defines our growth from a regional and county-wide perspective. we are creating a very restrained corridor-focused growth area. We are looking at a plan that will not result in sprawl and that will eliminate sprawl. We are looking at then the next level of complete communities, which is at the community and neighborhood level. Within this idea of compact growth, how do we create communities? And a lot of people have said, well, what is a complete community? It's really pretty straightforward. It's meaning that in a community, you can get the things, the services, the facilities that you need in a very convenient and easy proximity. That is what a complete community means. I mean, it's very fortunate that a lot of our down county communities, frankly, have that. But that is not typical. Many of our other communities in other parts of the county do not have convenient access to the things and services and facilities that they need. And it becomes difficult, whether you own a car and need to drive, or if you don't own a car because you might not be able to afford one and have to take public transit, or choose to take public transit. In either case, you struggle to get to the things that you need. The third chapter is about design, arts, and culture. And really what it's about is how do we provide guidance at the ground level, down to the design of blocks and buildings. Some of you know that my whole thing, my shtick, is design excellence. And that's partly because for 18 years, I was the historic preservation supervisor for Montgomery County. And I saw how places like Somerset, I was involved in the designation of the historic district in Somerset many years ago. I saw how places like Somerset were able to create great places with a sense of history and a sense of place through great design. And I think that that's something we'd like to see in many different parts of the county. The other three chapters really think about infrastructure, transportation, housing, and parks, and how those kinds of pieces of infrastructure can support the pattern of growth that's defined in the first three chapters. So what is the vision for growth in Thrive? Well, it's maintaining a constrained growth area. It's reintroducing East County growth corridors as key to racial equity and economic competitiveness. There was in the 1964 plan the idea of some growth in East County, and that was essentially written out of the 1993 plan. And we're looking at putting that back in because places like the Route 29 corridor and the Georgia Avenue corridor are places that should be given the infrastructure and the amenities to make them economically competitive and not be left behind. We want to emphasize east-west growth corridors with transit. We clearly want to protect the Ag Reserve and make it more accessible and relatable for the whole county. And we want to think about new ways to grow. Parking lots to places is a theme you've heard us talk about. Complete communities, 15-minute living. Again, these are concepts, not literal, measure how far you can get in 15 minutes. It's an idea that amenities, services, the day-to-day things that people need should be in close proximity to them and not difficult to get to. So in our new thoughts about growth, we clearly identify in the dark blue here our rural and ag reserve. And that is an area we do not see as changing and we want to protect. The next area, which is the light blue, is our corridor-focused growth area. And that is where we see new development taking place. The medium blue is what we call limited growth area. It's honestly our more suburban areas where we are not saying nothing will ever happen, but we do think there will be more limited growth. And we're focused on different kinds of complete communities. One of the things we want to emphasize is that you can be a complete community at any scale and in any context. The Ashton area, where we just did a master plan, can be a complete community, although it might never have more than another 100 dwelling units added to it ever. Very different than downtown Silver Spring. The idea is that any community, whether it's rural, suburban, or urban, deserves amenities and services in approximate location to people so that they have what they need. In looking at our corridor focused growth area, we did a lot of analysis, a lot of work. We overlaid it, for example, on our level of activity heat map, identifying where growth has happened, eliminating our special protection areas, which are the areas that are hatched, which are environmental areas that are protected. And we are designing the growth map to match the current areas of higher activity. We also are looking at having it reflect our current zoning more closely than the 1993 map did. And you can see the current zoning. Yellow is types of residential and varies in density. Green is our more rural areas, as you can see. So a few of the big shifts, we're talking about redrawing the growth map to match it to reality, to restore East County for equity and competitiveness, to focus growth in centers of activity along corridors, and within that growth focused footprint, and to strengthen the relevance of the ag reserve. We're talking about planning for people, not cars. This is not to say that we expect people to stop driving, but I think we've all seen that when we plan our roads for cars, it makes it more dangerous for pedestrians and for bicyclists. And the recent fatalities that we've seen are really tragic and I think reflect some of those problems. So we want to not get rid of cars, but emphasize transit, walking, and biking. Reduce vehicle miles traveled for environmental reasons. Introduce the idea of social connectedness and health as explicit objectives, which is very different than other earlier general plans. And recognize the significance of our IT infrastructure, as you can see with our meeting that we're having tonight. What we're really saying is we want to rethink the how, not just the how much and where of growth. So this is a plan that is qualitative in some ways, not quantitative. And we see redevelopment as the currency to pay for upgrades to amenities and infrastructure. We believe we can reduce imperviousness and get better stormwater performance and deliver complete communities, not for every single person in the county, but for as many as possible. And we want to elevate the importance of design using form-based codes, incorporating arts and culture, and recognizing quality of place as integral to economic competitiveness. I went away from the county for 5 years. I worked in the city of Alexandria, and I can tell you that quality of place is their brand. It is why people want to live and locate offices in the city of Alexandria, and it's an important brand to develop. Our current development patterns need to evolve. Again, I'm just saying a lot of down county folks are very fortunate, but you can see from some of our existing major corridors, they are not desirable, equitable places. They are not environmentally sustainable, and they're not making us economically resilient. We believe compact development is more sustainable than sprawl, and we use the example of Pike and Rose before and after. We actually had a 77% runoff reduction. between the two developments when it was just a big surface parking lot and what it is today. And we think the compact development can really equal design excellence from some of the buildings that you all have seen coming in our existing centers. So that's my presentation on Thrive. I'll ask Jeffrey, I have a few slides on attainable housing. Would folks like to see those, or do you want to keep the focus on Thrive?
Well, how long?
It's about 4 or 5 slides.
Yeah, why don't you show those?
Okay. So again, what I want to be clear on is there are concurrent and related efforts, but they are not the same effort. THRIVE Montgomery, which you see at the top, is the project that we just discussed. And that is what is before the council today. Nothing else is before the council today. THRIVE Montgomery is all the things that we just talked about, and that is what is before the council. In March, the council started thinking about some zoning text amendments, which I will be very frank and blunt with you. They did not consult the planning department. They worked on these zoning text amendments without our input, and they had to do with creating missing middle housing. We also had direction from our planning board as we were working on the Silver Spring downtown and adjacent communities plan to look at this issue of missing middle housing in adjacent communities. Neither of those projects came about as part of Thrive. They were separate efforts, but we have taken them on. We asked the council in March to not proceed with their zoning text amendments and to give us an opportunity as the planning department to do some analysis, to do outreach. There was going to be no outreach. We asked them to let us do outreach and to discuss those ideas. So zoning text amendment 20-07 is one of those ideas that is out there. And we also had a potential zoning text amendment that a different council member was looking at for corridor focused additional housing. We're looking at that also. So why are we doing that and why now? Well, the obvious reason is because we've been asked to by the council, but that's a little too obvious. But I think the reason that the council is so concerned and interested is that the cost of housing across the county is outpacing inflation, and neighborhoods are becoming attainable to fewer and fewer households. And it's really a tale of two equities. There is a growing disparity in wealth between those who already own homes and those who want to own homes. This just gives you an example. In 1996, our median income inflated to $20 was $108,000. In 2019, it's 110. So we've had pretty flat income growth. However, we picked 3 different zip codes, and in those zip codes, you can see the housing values in black and how much income you need to afford a house in that zip code. And what you can see is that in all 3 of the zip codes that we looked at, but we looked at more than this, these were just illustrative, you need to make well more than the median income to afford a home. And that means a lot of people are being priced out of ever owning a home. This is a national issue. This is something that's being talked about by many groups, including the White House. This is an article that came out just this summer about how exclusionary zoning, which is what they are calling purely single-family zoning, are affecting racial equity throughout Again, not Montgomery County. They weren't looking at Montgomery County. They were looking at this as a national issue, that it was creating more racial segregation and greater disparities in measurable outcomes. So what we are working on, and it is a work in progress, is thinking about other kinds of housing types that might address the concern we have of not having enough attainable housing. This does not mean that, for example, in THRIVE, that we aren't also recommending preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. It does not mean that we are not also recommending turn, obsolete office buildings into housing in some of our central business districts. It does not mean that we aren't saying, look at our MPDU law and try to make it even more effective in providing moderately priced housing. This is another tool in the toolkit. And we're looking very carefully at the idea of small scale, medium scale, and large scale types of housing. The small scale is the one that there's been a lot of focus on, that would be house sized and would be in single family homes and would be duplexes and triplexes and that kind of thing. But we're also looking at medium scale, which would be townhouses, and large scale, which could be flats that could be along corridors. And those would be corridors where we either have existing infrastructure or planned infrastructure. For the small scale, it would be, again, house-sized multi-unit structures that could be by right, but we're suggesting creation of something called a pattern book that would be something that would lay out the form-based requirements so that the house-sized multi-unit structures would not stick out like a sore thumb, but would fit in with existing communities. The medium scale and the large scale, again, are really along growth corridors and in centers of activity. The things that we think this housing strategy initiative could do is increase the diversity of housing options, work towards meeting the county's housing supply obligations and needs, create more opportunities for home ownership. And that's a really important point. In looking at a lot of these attainable housing strategies, we're looking at opportunities not just for rental, but for home ownership, and to really unravel the exclusionary aspects of our zones and diversify our community by diversifying our housing stock. So that's it. I've spent a lot of time talking. I'm going to stop sharing and let others speak and go from there.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Gwen, for sharing the incredible knowledge that you have of this draft. And I know that it's going to be very beneficial for our continuing discussion tonight. And so with that, I will turn it over to our neighbor up the street, Naomi Spinrat, for her presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. I too have a PowerPoint. It is far less colorful than Gwen's because I did it all by myself. And this is the first time I'm trying to share a screen, so I hope it works. Let's see. Well,
take your time. Matt, do you need any assistance from Matt?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Do you see the share screen button?
I do.
It should be in the
pressed
middle.
that.
So when you press that, I think it'll pop up a window with everything you have opened up. Is that right?
Yeah, but then it says open system preferences. Security and privacy. Well, I can't tell what I'm supposed to click here.
Is your PowerPoint open right now?
Yes, it is.
So when you do share screen, there should be a little block that shows the first slide in your PowerPoint. And
Yep.
you just click on that little block.
Okay.
I have to click on it once or twice, but then
Yep.
that should pop up.
Yeah, that's showing on my desktop, but I'm not
If you
seeing
want,
it
Naomi,
on
the other thing you could do is if you email it to me, I could pull it up and share it and just move it ahead.
Okay, let me
as
do
we
that.
go.
Let me do that. Sorry to delay things, but
It's okay. We're fine.
We've all been there.
Matt always comes to our rescue.
Well, and Melissa just messaged me to say that she can easily edit out any pauses that we have. So we'll be none the wiser when the recording is made.
Yeah.
okay. It should be on its way to you.
Great.
Let me get back to the Zoom. Have you got it?
It's not showing up for me quite yet. Let me try to reload here.
You sent it to manager@townofsomerset.com.
I sent it to
Trollinger@gmail.
Trollinger Somerset at Gmail.
Got it. Okay.
There we go. Thank you,
Okay.
Matt.
Okay, excellent. So I guess I'll preface again. And so now we will have Naomi Spinred make her presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so Matt, what I will do is tell you when I'm ready for the next slide, if that's all right.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm going to be, first, thanks to Gwen for her presentation. I'm going to be repeating a little bit of things that she said, but with a slightly different viewpoint. Yes, THRIVE is a framework for land use. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the Neighborhood Coalition, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a couple minutes. But the coalition fully supports THRIVE's three overarching goals of economic health, community equity, and environmental resilience, and we recognize that it's aspirational. However, planners have also said it gives them the tools they need to carry out specific policies. And it's that intersection of policies, process, and goals that the coalition has been looking at. If you could give me slide 3, please, Matt.
Okay.
The coalition began very organically as people who in various communities who've been active in land use and development efforts just started to or continued talking to each other. And as an ad hoc group, we began writing letters to the County Council and Planning Board, raising some of the issues and questions that were coming up for us. We've sent several letters over the last months, the most recent on July 6th to the County Council, and that was signed by representatives of 27 communities and 2 umbrella organizations, the Montgomery County Civic Federation and the Citizens Coordinating Committee on Friendship Heights. We now have more than 40 organizations, communities and municipalities involved, and 3 umbrella organizations. In all, we estimate that the signers represent more than 225,000 county citizens. I've updated this with some new information from today, which is about 20% of the county population. So we're continuing to grow as this process goes on. Can I have the next slide, please? The coalition had a number of concerns about the process, and some of those grew from recent events, and some grew through how this was moving through the process it's supposed to take. The data and assumptions that went into Thrive came pre-pandemic. They were based on how we live, work, educate our kids, commute, shop, and play prior to the pandemic. We've all seen changes since the pandemic started. Lots of working from home, lots of shopping online, and emptying of office centers. And there's still a great deal of uncertainty about which of the pandemic changes will last. In addition, the extra stresses and strains that dealing with the pandemic placed on the public meant that people were focused on dealing with those. And as we all discovered in our communities, not that many people initially were following or particularly interested in Thrive. We were concerned about what seemed to be the limited success of passive outreach measures like ads and buses and postcards, which really didn't require any active engagement from the public. And we thought that public involvement during the planning process had been very limited. For something as important as Thrive, we felt that it deserved more public involvement, and that in a county with about 600,000 adults, even using the figures that Gwen just provided of reaching about 12,000, that's only 2%. Can I have the next slide, please? Before I get into what's on this slide, I just want to go briefly into what the process for a master plan, which Thrive is, generally is, and to just give a very basic primer on that. The planning staff is the technical advisor for the planning board and for the county council. Unlike the planning board, which is appointed, the planning department consists of county employees. Typically, when they are preparing something like this, they provide a draft, and that goes to the planning board for work sessions, discussion, possibly revision. There's a hearing before all of that revision takes place. And after the work sessions, whatever the planning board approves is transmitted to the council. Once it gets to the council, there's another hearing, and then it's referred to committee, in this case, the Fed, Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, for its work sessions. They can then revise as they wish. And when they've completed their work and have a product to send on to the full council, the council itself has work sessions and comes up with a final product. This process wasn't followed completely for Thrive. The first draft of Thrive, which was called the staff draft, was rejected by the planning board chair, Casey Anderson, and rewritten. There was never a public hearing on the second version of Thrive. It was approved by the planning board and sent to the council as the planning board draft. So that's what the county council is working on now, the planning board draft. And I will reiterate what Gwen said, and the coalition understands this, that Thrive makes no zoning changes, but As Gwen explained, there's already work going on as a result of some proposed ETAs on changes to housing that will, if they go forward, be carried out through zoning text amendments. Can we go to the next slide, please? Zoning text amendments are direct changes into the zoning code. And what I'm telling you now is very simple so that it's easy to understand. When there's a master plan, other than this big general plan, it's usually accompanied by a countywide map, a local map amendment, which changes zoning only within the area of the master plan. The zoning text amendment changes zoning countywide in one fell swoop. So local plans allow consideration of a number of local factors like existing density, rural versus urban versus suburban, public service and facilities, what's there, what's needed, environmental considerations like stormwater management, and other things that may be of interest to a particular community. Next slide, please. In the case of the ZTAs that were approved by, or that were proposed by council members, and that the planning staff is looking at as part of its next step in implementing THRIVE when that is ultimately approved, we are going to see an increase in density in our single family properties. And that's an increase in the number of living units allowed in a single structure. A likely reduction in parking requirements, meaning that fewer on-site spaces will be provided. An immediate focus on attainable, not affordable housing. And one of the issues that has come up is the definition of attainable, which seems to be on the ground housing that's less expensive than what's currently available in desirable communities like Somerset. This is not affordable to those in Montgomery County who are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Next slide, please. I raise this all because THRIVE does recognize the role of local plans and participation. It states that there should be a prioritization of neighborhood level land use planning as a tool to enhance overall quality of community life and avoid reinforcing outdated land use patterns. A ZTA does not allow for the kind of local area involvement in what comes into a community that master planning on a local level does. And that is a big concern of the coalition. Next slide, please. I think we've done this already, so I'm not sure. Okay. In the letter that the coalition sent to the county council on July 6th, we proposed 7 changes to THRIVE. And the first of these, and the most important to the signatories of the letter, was to mandate the use of master and sector planning to specify zoning changes. And there were a couple of reasons for this. One was to achieve public buy-in. You want communities to welcome what is coming to them, and to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. What works in Poolesville or Potomac may not work in Somerset or Glenmont. The second thing that was important to member communities was to ensure that new housing types look like the single-family houses in the neighborhood in scale, footprint, massing, and other technical aspects. This is called compatibility, and it is something that we feel is important to retaining the look of single-family neighborhoods and the green cover, tree canopy, and so forth. The third thing of great importance to the members of the coalition was that THRIVE should include detailed strategies for how affordable and attainable housing can be created, including adaptive reuse, retention of naturally occurring affordable housing, public and private investment. We need a lot of creativity for affordable housing. And I again want to say that affordable housing is not attainable housing. Can we go to the next slide, please? In the original staff draft, there was a chapter on economic competitiveness, including policies related to economic growth and job creation. The coalition believes that without a growing economy and growth in jobs, and especially well-paying jobs, the development community will be less inclined to move forward on housing. The fifth item that we were concerned about was how to move our diverse county and diverse society from one that is very reliant on cars to one that is more transit-centered. That's a heavy lift. It's hard to get around on transit now in the county. Our sixth concern had to do with metrics, measuring results, adjusting THRIVE over time. We suggested requiring a 5-year review to document what had been accomplished and what unintended consequences there were, and to allow for modification. I would add to that greater clarity on the goals with specific accomplishments in specified timeframes. And finally, to include more robust funding methods for the infrastructure that will be needed to carry out THRIVE. Next slide, please. What THRIVE proposes is not going to be easy or cheap. It may well be worth it, but knowing what it might cost is important in making the choices about how to move forward, what takes priority. And the County Office of Management and Budget just very conservatively and carefully estimated that the one-time net countywide capital costs resulting from THRIVE could range from 6.4 to over $8.1 billion in current dollars. This is based only on what OMB could ascribe costs to, and some things that are not incurred by the county, like additional costs for WSSC, electric and gas lines and so forth, are not included because they're not incurred by the county. School costs are included, but THRIVE doesn't address the location of schools among all the compact communities. So that's a big question as well. In terms of annual operating expenses, we would see about a 12% increase in the county's annual budget, $623 million. Next slide, please. I'm going to cycle back to housing because that is going to, that's not easy and it's not going to be cheap. The THRIVE accepts the prediction of 200,000 population growth by 2050. That will raise the county to more than 1.3 million. It's estimated that 41,000 new housing units will be needed just in the next 9 years now. 33,000 are in the pipeline, but not yet built. I noted in Gwen's presentation that there was a figure for permits, which is one measure. This pipeline includes others that are making their way through the planning approval process, but haven't yet got to permitting. Most of the units in the pipeline will be market rate and for many out of reach. OMB in its estimate thought that over 31,000 new households in the next 20 years would be eligible for regulated affordable housing as a result of pandemic effects, the wealth gap, and a growth in housing prices. Next slide, please. And this brings us back to attainable. This chart is from the Planning Department's report on Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan Missing Middle Housing Market Study. And this has various types of homes, costs, and required annual income. And OMB had estimated that the 31,000 folks who need affordable housing would be earning up to $75,000. None of these allow for an income that low. As you can see, they range from 85,000 for a unit in a 6-unit apartment building all the way up. So these are not affordable units. These are based on analysis for properties east of Georgia Avenue. On the next slide, we have an analysis from a developer of properties in this area, developing them as triplexes, and those units would run $875,000 and would require an annual household income of $250,000. These are not affordable, and they're not even attainable when the median income in this county is $120,000. So for the more than 31,000 new households earning no more than $75,000 a year, these will be out of reach. There was another study that planning did called the Residential Development Capacity Analysis, which is available on their website. And that one, among other things, showed that there was adequate or there was the most capacity available for further development in CR zoned properties, but that developing these to their full envelope was quite expensive and the developers were not doing it. So to close, I would suggest that we need to devote a lot more attention to providing affordable and truly attainable housing now in a community-based context, and that all of the hard choices to come have to include community involvement in order to get consensus, some kind of agreement on how to move forward. And I do want to say that the coalition will continue to communicate and work with officials on THRIVE and any subsequent implementation. So I hope this hasn't been too confusing. It's a complicated subject. It's important that we get the right mix in all of our communities and that it take into account the needs of both current and future residents. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Naomi. That was a wealth of information, and it's always good to have as much information as possible to chew on. Now we will hear from Rob Goldman.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Rob Goldman. I'm the president of MHP, Making Home Possible. MHP has been around since 1989, so a little over 30 years. Our goal is developing quality, affordable housing in Montgomery County and the DC area. And the way we look at affordable housing is really a comprehensive approach in which we're really combining three things. And the way we talk about it is housing people, empowering families, and strengthening neighborhoods. I'll give you the short version of all that. But we, in terms of housing people, we own over 2,200 units of housing and probably about 32 or so buildings. We will preserve naturally occurring affordable housing or existing housing that we feel is at risk of being lost. We will do renovations and maintain that as affordable housing for the long term, or we'll get land and build new construction of affordable housing. And for example, we're working on a project right now in Forest Glen, which will take a rundown building that's sort of at the end of its useful life, about 70 units. And thanks to the planning board's approval, we will be doing about 180 units, give or take, right near the metro. So transit-oriented development and affordable. So that's really something that's important. And then in terms of, but with these buildings, there are people there, and we want to, we know they, we want to have activities. We have preschool, what we call community life programs, preschool program for the kids to be ready for kindergarten, after school programs for elementary school kids to help them with their homework, reading specialists, computer time. We have a middle school program. We have some programs for adults, computer classes, a whole host of things for both children and adults to give them the opportunities to succeed in life. And the last thing is strengthening neighborhoods. We work in 3 neighborhoods in Montgomery County, and it's about building stronger neighborhoods, healthier neighborhoods. We're in Long Branch, we're in Aspen Hill and North Wheaton, and it's about making physical improvements to a neighborhood. It's about building leadership in a community, and with those leaders addressing specific neighborhood issues that will make it a better place for everyone to live. So, just, with the pandemic, I think housing and affordable housing has really come to the fore. People really recognize that housing is so important. And, before the pandemic, I think in the Thrive book document, they highlight one of the measures that we like to look at is what percentage of people are spending more than 30% of their income towards housing. And so for a renter in Montgomery County, about 55% of renters in Montgomery County are rent burdened. But if you take someone who makes less than $50,000, 85% of those renters are rent burdened. So there's a number of people in Montgomery County who are struggling to make ends meet. And what does it mean to spend more than 30% of your income towards rent? It means that you're struggling every day to balance between paying for rent, paying for food, clothing, all those things, healthcare, all those things that one has to do to meet the life's expenses. And the smallest little hiccup can throw that all out of whack. And that's why it's an important measure, and it's important that we make housing affordable so people have the comfort and the extra revenue to be able to comfortably meet their other expenses in life. A couple things I'll just point out. I don't have a PowerPoint. I will try to keep it relatively short. A few things that have sort of gone on around affordable housing in the county before Thrive, and then I'll talk a little about Thrive. In 2019, I think, as Gwen kind of mentioned, the Council of Governments created their regional housing goals with a goal of at least 320,000 housing units to the region. The county council kind of approved that, and with their sort of part being that the county would be looking to have a goal of 40,000 housing units by 2030, with at least a goal of 75% being affordable to low and middle income households. So that's sort of part one. The council also this past year approved the creation of a dedicated fund for preserving existing affordable housing. $14 million was allocated as the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund. So, that's a start to sort of helping us to preserve affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing. And then the council appropriated last year, this current fiscal year, $43 million for the Housing Trust Fund, or the Housing Initiative Fund, HIF, where we like to call it. for the production of affordable housing. Now, to give you a context, DC, they are just approved 400 million for 2 years for affordable housing production. We're doing okay, but there's a lot more we could do or should do to meet our goals of developing more affordable housing in the county. I will say that, when I look at the THRIVE document, I'm no expert, but when I look at the THRIVE document, I think that my takeaway is that the goals are to really look at very different areas of housing and very different areas of affordable housing. So, for example, you have goals which, starting with homelessness and permanent supportive housing for the homeless. So that's one level where, there's really recommendations to increase the amount of housing to shelter folks who are homeless or formerly homeless. Then we have language around increasing housing for lower income families in Montgomery County. And that's much of the work that we do. And then there's some recommendations I'll mention in a second. And then the third level is, as has been talked about, the missing middle. And so as I see it, they're looking at just different facets of the need in Montgomery County. That, I feel like we're probably in one of the worst crises now that we're facing that I've seen in a very long time. And to buy an apartment building today is far higher than I've ever seen in the county. And I've been at my job for about 20 years. And so I do think that we're seeing now also the need for missing middle. I do, again, we're not overly involved in that. But when you think about teachers and firefighters, nurses, and other folks who sort of in many ways make up that missing middle, they are providing us the services that we're able to do what we do every day and survive and have a good standard of living. And so we do need to make sure that they're not living outside the county and driving in. At some point they get frustrated and decide, I'll do my teaching in Frederick County and not have a commute. So we don't want to lose those teachers and nurses and other folks. So I do appreciate that the THRIVE took the time to kind of look at different facets of housing and affordable housing. There are some recommendations I'll just point out, which we have been, the affordable housing community has been sort of very supportive of. Increasing funding for the Housing Initiative Fund. That's critical. As I said earlier, if we're going to be serious about it, at the end of the day, it takes money to do this work, and increasing the Housing Initiative Fund to match what's going on in DC is critical. Amending the moderately priced dwelling unit program. Right now, it serves people at 60% or 65% of the median income. That's a relatively, that's not super high, but that's sort of, there's a real need at the 30% level. So trying to get amending that law to reach a deeper subsidy or a lower income family would be helpful, and maybe a spread of folks along would be helpful. There's some language about payment in lieu of taxes to incentivize affordable housing development. There's currently legislation of the council on that, which we've been very supportive of. Again, if we're going to make it happen, we got to create the tools and incentives to make that. Some language about regulatory tools, so there's no net loss of affordable housing. We got, really got to get ahead. But when you look at these redevelopments that are going on, we got to make sure that when a redevelopment occurs, that there's no net loss of affordable housing. And yes, the new development will do 12.5% to 15% affordable units as MPDUs. But if the building was 100% affordable, we may get close, but we're not. There could be a net loss, and so we really have to create some creative strategies to make sure that there's no net loss of affordable housing. And if anything, we got to go forward. Some language around increasing home ownership. I do feel like we haven't, when it comes to affordable housing, have not done enough around affordable home ownership. And I think, really home ownership is building the equity that families have and the ability to stay in the community and to advance themselves and advance their life. And so that's an important recommendation. And there was some language related to that, promoting racial and economic diversity and equity in housing is super important. When you think about the history of housing and housing segregation and some of the things, redlining and all that, we really need to do far more than we're doing now to make amends for our history. And that's some other things, revising the building code and some other things, but a lot of good recommendations. I do appreciate Gwen Wright and her staff. They did reach out to the affordable housing community to get input, and so we appreciate that. And I thought it overall a wide, there's no one tool in the toolbox that's going to solve affordable housing. We got to do a lot of different things, and so these are a number of very good recommendations. Some are broader, big policy issue things that will need some getting more details, and some have some very specific recommendations. And I actually like that there's that mix in the document. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions as people have them.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob, for sharing your incredible wealth of information. And it really strikes me tonight how we have such a great panel that has so much knowledge on all these different topics. And now I will turn it over to our cleanup hitter, Kim Prasad, our last expert, to make a presentation. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jeffrey. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the town of Somerset and to share my story and my concerns regarding Thrive 2050. I am by no means an expert. However, I have lived many years with the problems and things that the county has done to disenfranchise the Black community. So I want to just kind of talk about that, talk about myself, and talk how I see Thrive 2050. Because I believe that communication is the key to breaking down barriers and to finding some kind of commonality. Now, I've lived in Montgomery County for more than 25 years, with 18 of those being in Wheaton. And as the first time in my immediate family to own a house, I understand the pride that comes with home ownership and the sense of security and ability to create generational wealth. And I believe all who want to be homeowners should be able to obtain this dream. As a community activist living in an underserved immigrant community, I have had a front row seat on how laws passed by the county council have negatively affected everyone's quality of life, especially Blacks, African Americans, and Latinos. I have started or worked with many coalitions, Save the Wheaton Library, the Wheaton Coalition. I've worked on term limits. I've chaired 9 districts for MoCo, and now Epic of MoCo. And my goal has always been to give those who are disenfranchised a voice and a face. However, I didn't start out being an activist. When I joined our neighborhood association, I was a scheduler, and I would organize lobbying efforts and send my neighbors out to speak to the council members or the press while I stayed home. Then one day, one little word changed everything, and that word was racist. And the devastation I heard in my neighbor's voice as she relayed what was said to her by the county council as they spoke regarding the issues that we were having in our community, code enforcements. And hearing her voice, I realized that I could no longer stay behind the scenes. So from that day forward, I decided to stand alongside my neighbors in the Wheaton community when we go out to discuss these issues that we have in our community. Wheaton, with all of its issues, is really a hidden gem. We have the Wheaton Regional Park, we have Brookside Gardens, we have some of the best ethnic restaurants, and we have this new bakery called Ooh La La that makes the best croissants you've ever had. And I know my bakeries. And we have the kindest people. And these are people who don't have to know you, who would give you the shirt off their back and not expect anything in return. But these are the same people who are working 2 and 3 jobs just to live in Montgomery County, just to live in Wheaton. And Wheaton is considered affordable housing. So they're working all of this. We are a racially, ethnically, and economically diverse community with a variety of different housing already. And we have different price points, which is why so many of us take issue with the blanket approach used by the planning board to come up with Thrive, because one size does not fit all. Now, I do understand that the planning board has worked on Thrive for 2 years, and I appreciate that. But I want everyone to understand what my community has gone through, not just my community, but from Wheaton to Glenmont to Aspen Hill, what we were dealing with during lockdown, and which was a year and a half we were in lockdown. And those zip codes, 20902, that's the zip code I live in, and 20906 had one of the highest rates of COVID in Montgomery County. So we were a little busy and we weren't paying attention to what the planning board was doing. We had dealing with death, we're dealing with job insecurity, with food insecurity. I have never seen lines so long waiting for food. I had neighbors who lost 5 members of her immediate family due to COVID. So we weren't paying attention. And, you know, we also had housing insecurity because, believe it or not, people were still being evicted during COVID. So these are sweeping changes to our community and life. There should have been more outreach made to our community and to other communities. So let me put this into perspective. In order to get 9D for MoCo on the ballot as a referendum question, I needed 10,000 signatures in the middle of COVID, okay? And the planning board had required like 500 comments to come up with Thrive. That this document is going to guide us for the next 30 years. And there just should have been more community input in that. So the next thing is that, according to Councilmember Reamer, Thrive is not a plan, but a vision and a philosophy. And this vision and philosophy, once again, leaves our most vulnerable residents out. We will be displaced. Do you know that there's more poor living in the suburbs than in the cities? Do you know why? Because you can't afford to live in the cities anymore. The planning board document stated that the median income for Blacks, African Americans, and Latinos is $72,000, between $72,000 and $76,000. This salary qualifies you for a house in the $300,000 range, $300,000 plus range. In Wheaton and Aspen Hill, you can still get a home for that price. In Aspen Hill, there was a townhouse going for $235,000. So we also need to be looking at, where do people want to live? Do they want to be living where all the action is, or do they really want affordable housing? Because we have it here. We have it. The issue and the concern is the cost of these new housing. And these new homes, according to the planning board document, in the Silver Spring and adjacent communities will cost $600,000 plus. Who can afford that? So what we're looking at in Wheaton is gentrification. And you see it time and time again. You see it in DC, which used to be called the Chocolate City. Now it's not. Every single time, New York Avenue, Capitol Hill, all of that has pushed Blacks right on out of the city and into PG County. Thrive says it's gonna try to work in not having sprawl, but Thrive will create sprawl. And let me explain to you why. Because we're not gonna leave Montgomery County. Those who cannot afford to live in Down County will simply continue to move up north. And that's what happened to me. I was living in downtown Silver Spring. We were ready to buy a house. I underestimated how quick the housing prices would go up once Discovery was built. Actually, Discovery wasn't even built and the prices started going up. And so what did I do? I just moved right on up to Wheaton. And that is exactly what's going to happen, because we're not going to leave Montgomery County. Montgomery County is good. we need a pathway to home ownership. And what is being presented in Thrive is more rental property. And we have this issue, rental does not generate, generational wealth. It creates a cycle of living in an apartment, and many people want something different. Families want something different. The Thrive document also, not planning board document also stated that by 2045, 73% of the population will be people of color, with significant percentage earning less than $50,000. And that's a real concern, because if these new housing is 700,000 plus, where are they to live? And that's something that we need to be thinking about. Complete communities give me pause as well. The purpose, to live, work, play, all within 15 minutes is ideal. That would be nice. The problem is we don't have jobs. We don't have jobs that allow that. It will allow us to walk to work, especially I'm talking about in the Wheaton area, and afford us the privilege of owning a home. We don't have that, because working at CVS will not allow you to own a home. And it's just basic. And the thing with the complete communities, having everything in one place, it breeds segregation, not eliminate it. Because there would be no reason for me to go outside my community. We'll be living in a bubble. And, my concern is, would all these complete communities have equal amenities? Will our schools be just as good as another school across town? These are things that are very important to us. And these things that need to be looked at very, very seriously. And then the cost of implementing Thrive is just staggering. And once again, taxes are going to go up because we have to pay for it somehow. And these taxes going up, once again, disproportionately impacts Blacks, African Americans, Latinos, low-income residents, and I'm going to go on and add seniors on a fixed income. So if Montgomery County was seriously interested in having affordable housing, which is what we deserve, then we need a plan that takes into account the character and individuality of our communities. We need a plan that establishes community advisory groups to facilitate citizen input. We need a policy to protect and increase natural affordable housing. We need a policy that will enforce no net loss of both regulated affordable housing and natural occurring housing. We need a policy that prevents displacement of residents and gentrification of our communities. And this is just to name a few. We have an opportunity here to turn things around for Montgomery County. And I think we need to seize that, but it's not being done with vagueness, indecisiveness, and indifference. So we need to go back to the drawing board and take care of this the right way, including involving the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim, for sharing your story. And we have received a wealth of information tonight. I'm sure it has generated a tremendous number of questions. And we will start by having our council ask some questions. So we will start with our council president, Steve Surko.
Well, first off, I want to thank all of our panelists, Gwen, Naomi, Robert, and Kimblin, for taking the time out this evening to speak with our town. I really appreciate it. I think I'm perhaps a little more partisan than the general population here. I'm looking at, or I'm trying to understand the impact on our town, on Somerset, of Thrive 2050. So I was hoping that each of the panelists could give us just perhaps a brief snapshot of what they think Somerset would look like in 2050, with or without Thrive 2050. Starting with Gwen.
Thank you. Again, I think that some of our down county neighborhoods like Somerset and Chevy Chase and others are actually pretty good examples of places that are relatively complete communities today. You have the ability to walk to a grocery store, you have the ability to walk to a school, you have the ability to walk to healthcare. There are a lot of amenities and services that you have that many other parts of the county do not have. I really envision that in 2050, a lot of what exists in Somerset would probably stay somewhat the same. We might see some additional housing and hopefully upgraded housing on corridors that are near Somerset, and those could include Wisconsin Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, and River Road. That would provide more amenities and more walkable places. We might see some co-located facilities, which is another thing that Thrive emphasizes, where you might have again, I'm using an example from another community. You might have a new fire station with affordable housing on top of it. I worked on a project like that in the city of Alexandria. You might have a new police station with affordable housing on top of it. You might have, those kinds of co-located opportunities so that nonprofit developers like MHP and Robert Goldman might have an opportunity to provide affordable housing at a variety of ranges, co-located with some other use. That is along a corridor. That's really like one of the big ideas that I think Thrive would promote. So those are just a few ideas, but that's to me the sort of vision that might be in place.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Naomi, could you share some thoughts?
Yeah, you kind of have to go beyond Thrive to what's developing in attainable housing to get a sense of what might be coming. And I'm sure Gwen will correct me if I get anything slightly off here, but so far the planning board has approved allowing in our 60 neighborhoods, which is what Somerset is and what my neighborhood is, duplexes, triplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes by right. That means no input. Each unit in each of those could very well be allowed to have an ADU, which means if you have a quad, you could have 4 accessory dwelling units or ADUs on the same property. They would also be allowed to have home occupations, which is when a business is run out of a home. In some cases, this could be someone who's a writer or an editor, which is called a no impact home occupation, but there are also medium impact, high impact, medical. So that further increases density. All of Somerset would fall into what's called a priority housing district. And along Wisconsin River, and on the edge of the activity center, there is discussion of an optional housing method which would allow larger buildings, but those would be subject to review. The corridor, distances from the corridor have been mentioned are 300 feet and 500 feet. If you think in terms of the standard frontage for an R60 property, that's equivalent. 500 feet is, well, it's 60 feet for each property. So that's about 8 or 9, I guess 8 houses. 300 feet is about 5 houses in from the corridor. I don't recall having yet seen a distance from an activity center. So it is possible that Somerset would look very different. It depends what the costs are. As you saw, the housing that is likely to be created with multiplex structures is not likely to be inexpensive, but the potential profit for developers is pretty high. So who knows how that will sort out. I do want to mention, by the way, Chevy Chase West is in essentially the same situation between the Bethesda and Friendship Heights metro stations. All of Chevy Chase West falls within a mile as the crow flies of a metro station. And we have some of our frontage on Wisconsin Avenue. Just north of Norwood Park, the Housing Opportunities Commission has purchased the Alden Apartments. So altogether, there's about 9 acres that will at some point be redeveloped with, I expect, a high percentage of regulated affordable housing. And I do want to mention, this isn't directly pertained to your question, but it was something that Rob mentioned, a concern about losing naturally occurring affordable housing. And we actually are going to see that in one project along Battery Lane, which the planning board approved. Those are also Alden properties, a number of buildings that are being redeveloped. And those have been naturally occurring affordable housing. There are about 475 units. In the redevelopment, that will drop to about 375 regulated affordable housing units. So
I do need to add in there, Naomi, and I know you know this. We have actually looked at the incomes because that whole area is one census tract. And there is not one person who makes less than $100,000 in that entire census tract. So those might be naturally occurring affordable housing, but the people who are living there are all people who make over $100,000 a year. And they're getting a good deal on their housing.
they are
When
getting
it
a good
becomes
deal. They are
regulated.
getting a good deal, but the rents that they're charged are within the affordable range, and that may or may not continue when the redevelopment occurs.
Right, but when it gets
So
to
this
be
is something that we need to be
regulated,
concerned about,
regulated
as
housing,
Rob noted.
you will
So,
know that someone who has the right income goes in it.
I think, you know, I hope. it gives
I
a-
appreciate the debate,
a
but I wanted
picture
to
of
give
what
my
might
fellow
happen in
council members a
Somerset.
chance
It's a
to
little bit different.
weigh in. So I
Well,
think with
let me
that,
point out, of course, let me point out and remind everybody that this is a draft that is going to be submitted, that is going to be approved by the county council. So the input, there's no need for any kind of debate here because the council will consider all these views when they make their final decision.
Sure, but when misinformation is being presented, I have to respond.
It's
No,
not
no, of course,
misinformation,
no.
it's different information, Gwen, and it's fine that people have both versions. I don't
Okay.
have a problem with your interruption, but there is a net loss in terms of what the rents are.
I appreciate all the commentary. I'd like to move on to Robert, if you have any thoughts on what Somerset might look like.
I wouldn't say one way or the other. I'm no expert on this, but I would almost say it doesn't matter whether Thrive, I mean, I hate to take this view because there's a lot of work, but the reality, as Gwen sort of said, the dynamics and trends that are happening whether Thrive passes or not, right?
Yeah. I think
And
you're
so
right.
the need to address missing middle is going to be there whether Thrive passes or not, right? The legislation, as we already saw, is being push even before Thrive passes, right? And so Thrive isn't necessarily going to require that Will Joando's bill pass, right? The work and the dynamics of what all it's saying is we need missing middle housing, right? And we need that. That's just a fact, right?
And we do.
How that looks, I don't, so I can't say what, it's hard to say because it's not Thrive itself that's going to make whatever changes were to happen. Even with that, if you were to say all the things that passed and all the things that people are concerned about, I would take more of Gwen's view. I don't think it's going to have major impact on a town like Somerset. That's just my kind of view. But yep.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Kimberlyn, do you have any thoughts on how this might impact Somerset?
Don't have any thoughts, but I want to reiterate what Jeffrey said, that this is before the Fed committee right now, and they need to hear from you. They need, there's a possibility that they can turn this back over to the planning board, but they need to hear from you. So, people are coming up to speed as to what is really going on and what the truth really is, and clearing the smoke off the mirrors. And another great place to get, another great resource is CCFH's website, which has a lot of documentation and information for you to go to and read for yourself. So I would highly recommend that everyone in Somerset do that, because you are on the line.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kimberlyn. I really appreciate all of your engagement. And I turn it over to the next council member.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Barr, your turn.
Thank you to all the presenters again, because your perspectives, though they differ, are very enlightening for us in terms of what's happening in Thrive, and I think will also increase interest in the town quite markedly in what's happening. My general question, I'll try to provide some context around it, is mainly of Gwen, which is what role do you see for municipal building codes in this process once Thrive is passed? And the context around that is that municipal building codes deal with the particulars of particular towns. We're currently working on a stormwater ordinance, and you can imagine exactly why, because we are suffering a lot from stormwater right now. We do a lot around parking when there's building construction, because we have very narrow streets and parking is a major problem in town. So we're always going to have those problems. We're not going to have suddenly wide streets, and we have hills and a lot of rain, and stormwater is going to flow. So we need some kind of building codes to manage that. But at the same time, a number of us in town are concerned about the construction we are seeing in town right now, which is really occasioned by the expense of the lots. That is, builders have to spend over $1 million to buy a lot in town before they start building. And what they're trying to do is put as much luxury into the construction as possible, because they're trying to make some kind of profit from once they've invested $1 million before they've even started building. And that's going to happen also, and that's what Naomi was saying, when they're building duplexes or triplexes, because the lot's not going to be cheaper, then it's actually probably going to be more expensive when they buy it. So we would like to see a more diverse community come in, but it's not going to happen unless attention is paid to how we can arrange the financing in a way that can get more people in. I think we need county's help on that. We can't do that alone with our building codes. So I'll go back to the general question: what role do you see building codes having in the future with this Thrive Montgomery passing?
Thanks for that question. I do want to be clear that, again, I think some of the questions you're asking really relate to the attainable housing strategy. Thrive is the bigger 30,000 foot umbrella that I think Rob Goldman talked about, saying we need more housing types. Just, we need to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. That language is in the document. We need to look at our MPDU law. So it's a very broad umbrella kind of document. In terms of attainable housing, which again is not before the council at this time, what at least we're recommending is for the small scale attainable housing that it would be house sized, meaning it would meet the existing heights and setbacks that exist today in the zones. The additional requirements that are placed by individual municipalities would also still be in place. The historic district designation in Somerset would still be in place, and any change or new construction would have to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission. None of those existing kinds of rules, whether it be from the jurisdiction or from the Historic Preservation Commission, none of those would be eliminated through at least what's currently being discussed in the attainable housing strategies.
Thank you. Naomi, do you have anything to add there?
You're muted.
There has been some discussion of density incentives for affordable housing. That would change the various technical limits relating to height, setbacks, things like that. I don't believe there's been action on that yet, but it's something to keep an eye on as the work sessions continue.
Can move on to the next council member now.
Okay, thank you. Council Member Heller. You're muted, Debbie.
Okay. I wanted to thank all of you because I appreciate you coming out tonight. I appreciate the work that you individually do. And I want to address really Thrive. And Gwen, it's an incredible document. It's an incredible, probably really needed document for our county. I'm not sure how it's really going to help us here in Somerset. I'm worried. I think people I talk to in the neighborhood are worried. Even though we'd all like to encourage diversity in our neighborhood, I'm not sure how to really go about getting that, because land prices are so high. So I think, let me ask a couple of questions that I think people in the town don't understand. I don't think they know what by right means. I don't know that I understand what by right means. Does by right mean that I can pull down my house and build a quadplex on it because I want to? Can only developers have by right? Can anybody do it by right?
So again, I'm going to just reiterate, that is not a Thrive issue. It's an attainable housing strategy issue, which is not before the council, but is being discussed by the planning board right now. And definitely we would appreciate anyone's input on that, which it's in work sessions at the planning board now, not at the council. So to answer your question though, because I just want to make sure if folks have input, they know where to direct their input. The idea of by right is that you could go to the Department of Permitting Services and get a building permit. Just as today, if someone wants to tear down a single family house, as long as it's not in the historic district, they can do that and get a building permit to build a new house. And that new house has to meet the height and setback requirements in the zone. What this would change is that in addition to meeting the height and setback requirements, you could do potentially 2 to 3 units in that building. but you wouldn't be able to necessarily create a bigger building than what a new single-family house would be. It just would have smaller units in the actual building. The idea that we have promoted as staff is that there should be what we're calling a pattern book. And it would be a document that would emphasize, for example, that it's better and it's necessary, in essence, to have a pitched roof instead of a flat roof. If you have a flat roof, you can add more volume within the same height, but it wouldn't fit with the character of most of our single-family neighborhoods. And so, what we have discussed is that it would be by right if you met the pattern book, but if you did not, it might have to go through a review process.
Okay, get that. Another question I have is I don't understand the housing priority districts in terms of the 300 and 500 feet. Does that mean that if you live closer to River Road or Wisconsin, you can measure out 500 feet or 300, whatever it becomes, and buy all those properties and then build a little apartment building? Is that what that means?
That could mean that, but
Okay.
what it would, so the 300 to 500 is what's being discussed because that is the average size of a typical block. A block is about 300 feet in most places. In more suburban areas, sometimes it becomes 500 or 600, but in more urban areas, it's typically 300 feet on all sides. So the idea is sort of one block in on major corridors.
So you
But
could,
that would not be by right.
okay, but if I was creative, I could go buy all my neighbors' houses and then build a small apartment building. If I
Not
wanted
by
to.
right.
Not by
Not
right.
by
but-
right.
But
You
it's
would have to
anything-
go through an optional method of development, which would require you to file a site plan with the planning board and go through all of the steps involved in a site plan. So that would not be by right.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to do for everybody that's on the call is so they get a picture of what could happen. Because I think most people on this call don't understand it. I think most people never got the postcard, Gwen. I certainly didn't. I wasn't part of the 90,000 people that were part of putting together Thrive. I would think most of our neighborhood wasn't, because every time I mentioned Thrive, people look at me like, what's that? And I've been busy spreading the word because I think it's really important that we understand it. And I think what's most important, and I'd love to get this message across, is that all the small neighborhoods, because I've been going to all these meetings lately and listening to everybody, all these small neighborhoods, we need to be represented. We need to be able to come to the table so the planning board understands what's important to our communities. And they all might be a little different, but we haven't been invited to the table as a group. And that's what needs to happen in this next phase, please. That's it for
And
me.
for attainable housing, that absolutely should and will happen. I want to be really clear. Attainable housing was moving forward with ZTAs submitted by council members, and there was going to be no outreach. I personally found that to be wrong and upsetting. And I will tell you, I personally reached out to council members and I said, put on the brakes on this. You really have not consulted with planning. You have not consulted with communities. We need to take this much slower. And so that is what happened in March. And we have been working to get ideas out there since March, and honestly doing it as quickly as we're able to. But
Right.
that's why I want to be clear. None of those specific ideas about 300 feet, 500 feet, quadplex, any of that were ever a part of Thrive. None of that was ever intended to be a part of Thrive. It's much too detailed to be in a general plan. And so we were moved forward with a general concept saying we need more missing middle housing. And honestly, I'm just being frank, some folks jumped the gun on us a bit with this and started getting down to the details before we had finished the sort of overarching policies. And so we're now chewing gum and running at the same time. We're trying to both talk about the policies, but begin talking about more details. And we want to involve the community in those discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Okay, but I think Naomi wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to say
Also be
something
clear-
very quickly, and
Before you
that's,
Go-
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Jeffrey, go ahead.
No, Naomi, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that almost simultaneous effort has been very confusing to the community. And I would say I appreciate that that puts a burden on planning staff that requires extra effort to sort out. So that's all I have to say for what it's worth.
So, but what I wanted to point out is that Gwen is here tonight as a resource person. She's a staff person for the planning board. The person that we need to direct our comments to are our county council members, because they can address all of these concerns that we have. We elect them to make the final decision on this, and maybe Kim wants to weigh in on that in terms of how important it is to have input from us. Don't you want to weigh in on that, Kim? As an
I do.
advocate.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was on mute. I think it's important even though we live in different communities, we are one county. And what happens in Wheaton, Glenmont, and any place else will eventually affect you. And it's very important that the county council hears from you. And as I said before, you can go to the FH website, get confused with all those C's. Go to their website and you can reach out to your county council person from there. All you got to do is just point and click and type in your questions, your concerns, anything in from there. So they really need to hear from us. I can't emphasize that enough.
Okay.
Even if you're confused, even if you're confused, you need to say that you're confused, and they need to slow down this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Kumar.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for organizing this panel, diverse opinions, and thank you to all of you for spending many hours on a Monday evening with our neighborhood, answering our questions. Very grateful for everything you're doing and for spending time with us. Gwen, I have a set of questions that are both on Thrive and on attainable housing. So drawing the distinction that you've been emphasizing all evening. So on Thrive, I would welcome your reactions to a set of comments made by both Naomi and Kim. Particularly Naomi's comment that the pandemic has changed some of the underlying assumptions behind Thrive. I noted on your slides that you've done extensive work, which is, laudable and important. I, appreciate the value of a vision document. It's clearly powerful. I know Robert was saying it may not matter, but it's clearly powerful because there's already been action, as you were just commenting, because subsequent policy steps are anchored in these vision documents. But a lot of those studies were completed in early 2020, and the pandemic has effectively changed a lot of the fundamentals behind the vision documents. I would love your reactions or some clarification on what I thought was an excellent highlight from Naomi. And then on Kim's set of comments that Thrive may in fact exacerbate racial inequalities. there seemed to be a disconnect between your vision and the sort of view from communities about what Thrive could achieve, and that you might not have done a sufficient job of engaging communities in the process. So a set of questions around Thrive, your reactions to both Naomi's charge that you missed the pandemic, and Kim's charge that you might actually be exacerbating through Thrive racial inequalities and might not have sufficiently engaged communities. And then I have a set of questions on attainable housing, which I'll get to after I hear your response on that.
Sure. Can you hear me? I switched to headphones, and I hope you all.
And you could hear me while you were switching?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So in terms of the world around us and how it's changing, absolutely. The world around us is changing all the time. And COVID is certainly a part of that. Emerging technologies are a part of that. But I know this is going to sound a little, corny, perhaps. I actually have great faith that people build communities the same way that they have been building communities since Roman villages were built along hillsides, that people need people, they want to gather, they want connectedness. I think we saw that even during the pandemic, that people, as soon as the weather turned nice and people could get outside and walk in our parks and be around other people, they did it, because I truly believe that we inherently want that kind of social connectedness, and we want community very, very, very much. And that's why small settlements started, and that's why we continue to gather together. So I think the basic ideas in Thrive are going to continue to be pertinent, because what they focus on is how we use a compact form of development to create connections, and how we are able to create places that people want to be in. The other thing I would simply say is that if the world 10 years from now changes so dramatically that we are all literally never leaving our houses for any reason whatsoever, we can update this plan. It is not written on tablets, of stone. It can be updated if the world changes that dramatically. So I do, and I also would note, I sort of mentioned this early in the presentation, all of the jurisdictions around us, from the District of Columbia to Frederick to Loudon to the city of Rockville, all have been updating their general plans, and not one of them has said, stop, let's put the brakes on, everything is changing too much, we just don't know what end is up, we have to stop this process. Every single one of those jurisdictions finished their process. They did it during the pandemic, they did it with a combination hybrid of personal and virtual outreach, and they were able to get a document that at least is a start at looking at the future. Again, not that it can't be updated.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think the question is not whether you stop or, completely dismantle the process. The question is, for example, have you commissioned any studies that look at the impact of the pandemic? Have you looked into the changing nature of work? I ask all of us, I can tell you in my professional setting, if I am making a plan that has potential implications of over $600 million. And I do manage a fund that's pretty close to that amount. We will be commissioning a lot of studies to understand the impact of the pandemic. So it's not to stop the process, but have you incorporated studies, commission the kind of work that you highlighted in your slide prior to the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. We're in the midst of those right now. Yes, we're doing a study right now of whether mixed-use development is still pertinent. We're doing a study right now about, and we did, as part of Thrive, we did do transportation models about whether we continue moving and using transportation as we currently do, or whether we start using autonomous vehicles more, or whether we start using transit more. We did modeling for each of those scenarios. And again, we're glad to share both the things we did during Thrive and the things we're doing now. But it is true that I don't know that we're going to fully know the impact of this pandemic for at least 5 to 10 years in terms of really what is it going to mean to us as a society. And some of it is going to be how, how quickly some medical issues are resolved. Some of it is going to be how quickly children are going to be able to be vaccinated. I mean, there's so many unknowables right now that I do think it definitely, and one of the things that I think Naomi mentioned that I think is a good idea is that we should, in whether it be 5 years or 10 years, have a sort of checkup and see where things are. I'm a great believer in, looking at metrics and thinking about how things are progressing. And we actually added metrics to every chapter in the document that we can use to track what's happening. And we have started doing what I call master plan reality checks for some of our existing master plans to sort of understand where they are. But a lot of times you can't really know that until something is, again, been around for a decade or so. Things move a lot more slowly. But I did want to get to your other question, which was about, the issue of gentrification. And I think it is, I absolutely hear and agree with Kim's concern about that topic. I have seen the changes that have happened in the District of Columbia that have changed neighborhoods dramatically. I have seen the, and I wouldn't honestly say that it is not just Prince George's County where people are moving. It is also Montgomery County. And that, we are seeing great shifts in our demographics. And that what we need to do is create communities, and the goal of complete communities is not to create isolated hubs of people from one group or another. It's really to create communities that are comfortable and have a diverse enough housing type and price points that people of many income levels, of many races, of many backgrounds can come together and feel like they have the amenities and services in proximity that they want and need to live.
I feel like a lot more time with you for these conversations, Gwen. There's lots to discuss.
Tonight is only the beginning.
Yes, I know.
The beginning.
I had a set of questions on the attainable housing, and I appreciate you preparing a set of slides separately for that. That was very, very helpful. And I hope we can circulate that in our neighborhood. I think it'll be important for everyone to have that on hand. You mentioned that you were planning to transmit zoning recommendations to the county council. Could you give us, and I think also provide input to the zoning text amendments? Could you give us a sense of the timing for all of that? When you will provide those recommendations? You, I think, gave us a flavor already of the kinds of recommendations and how that process will move forward.
So we are doing work sessions now with the planning board, and we have at least, again, I'm sorry, I don't remember if it's 3 or 4 more work sessions. I do not anticipate any recommendations.
Council level work sessions, you mean?
No. Planning board.
Planning board, okay.
Planning board. Again, I want to just, because it does get confusing.
Yes.
The council is looking at THRIVE. THRIVE is the overall umbrella policy document. They are having work sessions, and I believe they hope to finish the work sessions with the Fed committee by mid-October.
That's right. And those are, by the way, for our town, they are on the website.
Right. So that's THRIVE. On attainable housing, we are going through work sessions with the planning board, discussing different options. I do not expect the recommendations to go forward until, I'm going to say, December.
So that's when you will
end of this
transmit
year.
the recommendations to the council.
Right. At that point, the council is going to go through their process of doing public hearings, of doing all of their kind of work, and they will probably take several more months.
Got it. And one last.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pop off for a minute. I think my daughter is locked out of my house, and I have to go let her in.
Okay,
I'll be
thank
right
you.
back.
So, Councilmember Kumar, let me point out that all of those work sessions are public meetings that I hope all of you that are interested will follow. I also want to point out that I know this is all, the whole process is a little bit confusing. Tonight, we are focusing on THRIVE 2050. The attainable housing document, we are planning to have a future forum like this on that document. But tonight is just the beginning of our efforts to educate everyone on this very complicated topic.
And it's been great.
But I'm glad you brought that up. But I do want to let everyone know that we are planning to have an additional forum in the future only on the attainable housing document.
So just last question, Gwen. This is picking up on what Debbie, our fellow council member Debbie Heller was getting at. I'm wondering, could a neighborhood like Somerset be impacted by all the housing strategies? So you are rezoned for small scale, what you were calling small scale. You are, the outer peripheries of your neighborhood can accommodate medium scale. And then those parts of the neighborhood that are on River Road for us and on Wisconsin are, are able to accommodate large scale. So is it possible for a single neighborhood to see all 3 types and be impacted by all 3 types of housing strategies?
So I think it is definitely possible that there could be a duplex or triplex built within the neighborhood.
That's the small scale? No,
that's the small scale that is house sized.
Right. So that comes after your rezone for that. Anyone by right, as long as it matches the book.
Plus, I could imagine that there could be medium to large scale on corridors that have, again, what we focused on, that have infrastructure such as transit, whether it be buses or BRT. That's the sort of type of corridor development that we are seeing, that we hope to see coming out of this plan. So I think that, yes, there could be a duplex built in the neighborhood, and there could also be some development that might happen along River Road, for example.
So a single neighborhood could see the impacts of multiple housing strategies.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gwen, and thank you all of you for your time. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rovak.
Hi, thank you guys all so much. I am just really trying to soak it all in and understand, and it's very confusing. So my question for Gwen, so I know you've kind of addressed this, but if Thrive does not include this attainable housing part of it, like you've got your overall goals, but how do you know how you would achieve those goals without having, you know, kind of the strategies underneath?
So again, like I was using some examples from our 1960s general plan. The 1960s plan said preservation of open space is important. That is a goal. And then based upon that, there were additional planning studies and master plans that resulted in legislation to create the preservation of agriculture and rural open space plan and the transfer of development rights that created our ag reserve. And that was the idea of creating an overarching goal or policy, and then following it up with a series of studies, master plans, legislation, new tools, the things that are needed to actually implement that goal or that policy. And it doesn't happen generally overnight. Again, the example I gave was they passed a plan in 1969 and they didn't have transfer of development rights until 1980. So the role of Thrive, and in fact, I've sort of said this to my own staff, is to set our work program for the next couple of decades. You know, I'm going to be retiring in a year or two, but, you know, there has to be a future work program. It sort of sets the work program of what are the things that we think are important, and then how should we look at trying to find the tools to implement those. And every step in exploring tools or doing studies or doing master plans is something we work with the communities on. We don't do those in a vacuum.
So how you had said, like with this attainable, or, you know, with the zoning text amendment that's kind of come up on the side, we'll call it, you know, not to be confused with Thrive 2050. You had said that you guys have your own separate attainable housing plan within your Thrive plan as part of it. So how do they kind of work together in terms of, you know, how would that work, I guess?
Okay, so we have a chapter in Thrive that is about housing. And in that chapter, we talk about a bunch of different issues, including what's the problem we're trying to solve? What are some of the policies that will solve it? And I will say there's literally one page in the document that talks about missing middle. I mean, it's 60-page document. And there is one page in the document, I'm sort of looking through it as we're talking, that talks about missing middle. But literally on the next page, it starts talking about preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, on changing the moderately priced dwelling unit program, to provide more moderately priced dwelling units. It talks about a range of tools. So if this document gets approved, again, what we would have anticipated is that we would have a work program where we would say, okay, let's come up with ideas for preserving naturally occurring affordable housing and legislation or master plans that might be necessary to do that. And we would engage in that with the affordable housing community and with residents and come up with ideas. With the missing middle one, we got a little bit preempted because it came up sooner than we expected it to. And we're trying to, do the best we can to provide the council with some guidance. They had not initially asked for our guidance on this. And we sort of, in our pushy way, said, you need our guidance on this. Please let us give you some guidance. And they may end up deciding not to take any of our guidance. They may end up deciding not to even do missing middle at this time. That is going to be up to the council to decide if this is something. It was an idea. It's one of probably a dozen housing ideas that are in this document. And it's one they wanted to sort of jump in on. And so I do not know how it will end up.
Okay. And then, so for the projected 200,000 more people that are going to be living in our area by 2049. So, let's take the idea of these big, I can't remember what they're called, but we'll call them the corridors of Wisconsin and River Road. And does your plan, I know there was some confusion over rental and owning. Would your plan be for rentals, or is it for both, a mix, I guess?
So THRIVE does not distinguish between whether the new housing should be rental or ownership. The attainable housing strategy does have more of a focus on ownership. But there are other tools to get ownership. The moderately priced dwelling unit program today allows for both rental and ownership moderately priced dwelling units. But there are a series of hurdles to do ownership moderately priced dwelling units, particularly if you do them in a condominium regime, where you might end up with folks being able to buy a moderately priced dwelling unit condominium, but have trouble keeping up with the condo fees. So that is something that I think is a study that we would probably like to engage in, is how can we get more ownership units through our moderately priced dwelling unit program that is the legally mandated affordable housing unit.
Okay.
Councilor Roback, you might want to ask the other panelists to give their perspective on that.
Sorry, does anyone else would like to share their perspective on that?
I just have a comment to make. There is, I think it might be helpful to some or all of you to view a video on missing middle housing and what it is. This was a presentation that was set up by a planning staffer some months ago, and it's available on YouTube. And I can pull the link and send it to Matt or Jeffrey.
Yeah, we will make sure that information is provided to our council and residents. Thank you.
I mean, I don't have
Do Rob want
to add, but my read of the document seems to suggest that there's elements for rental as well as home ownership and throughout the document. And again, all types of incomes, all types of housing types. And as Gwen said, the missing middle is just one element of the housing plan.
And so for the 200,000 extra people, like, do you guys then take it down to like a study on like what school they would go to. And, there's a lot of overcrowding in certain schools. I mean, does part of Thrive 2050 include building, a series of new schools?
That would be done in subsequent master plans. Thrive does not mean that we'll stop doing master plans. In fact, it means that we're going to do even probably more master plans. We might focus them on corridors, which we had not done as much of in our master plans in the past. And we might do them in slightly different parts of the county than we've really focused on. But the level of detail of deciding, how many units go where and how many units would require a new school, or how many units could go around a BRT stop, or that level of detail is not the level of detail for Thrive. It's the level of detail for a master plan. And we will do many, many master plans.
Okay. And then this is my final question. I'm sorry.
Before you ask that, maybe did Kim want to comment on the ownership versus rental aspect of that you asked earlier?
Me?
Yeah. Did you want to comment on her? Do you want to restate your question, Councilor Rovak?
Well, no, I was just listening to what Kimblin was saying. I think that it's really important for this attainable, affordable housing to have a path to ownership. So, that it's not just a bunch of rental units that turn over, because I think that that's really what will build out communities and enable people to,
So I think that the question for Kim was she comfortable with the language that's in there in the draft, or would she suggest any changes to that language?
Well, yeah, I would suggest some changes. It needs to be scratched and done over again. There's just no substance to, it's not even a plan. To me, a plan tells you how you get from point A to point B. And this is just a wish list of how they want us to live without putting it, in my opinion, without putting the work into it. We don't have any of the studies. We don't have a fiscal impact study. What OMB did, they did with what information they could. We don't know, they didn't have everything that they needed. We don't have a racial equity study. A lot of information is missing, and it's very concerning because the trend is these new homes and are going to be rentals, and we're competing. Home ownership, home people who want to buy homes are competing with big businesses. We're competing with speculators. We're coming in, buying up properties and building these apartments. So I don't believe there's going to be home ownership, a path to home ownership, and therefore we will continue to lag behind everybody else in being able to create generational wealth.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you have a last question, Councilmember?
I was just wondering in terms of how they were saying that there would be a situation where we could see a developer, come in and make a 2 unit, possibly like a 3-unit house within Somerset. I understand that it would have to be to the specifications of, what a single family house may look like in our neighborhood. But, when you talked about that, so I think Debbie was saying, could I then just sell my house, or can I just tear down my house and build up a 2.5, 3, unit place? Who would do that ultimate monitoring? And, how do you ensure that the developers aren't just getting rich off making a lot of multi-unit housings in these kind of quote unquote expensive neighborhoods? How does that work?
So anyone can do it. Any property owner can tear down their house and build something as long as it meets the zoning and the setbacks and the height. So yes, you could tear down your personal house and build, if this went through attainable housing, you could build a duplex. And you could decide if you wanted to live in one half of that duplex and rent out the other half, or you could sell the other half. That would be your choice.
But does it have to do anything? So the attainable or the affordable part of that doesn't really, it doesn't ring, like no one's monitoring and saying like, you know, this developer can't sell the house for X amount of money.
Yeah, and that's correct. And it's specifically why the program is called attainable housing, not affordable. There are other programs that we were talking about in Thrive that deal with affordable housing, the MPDU program, the naturally occurring affordable units, the ideas of co-location to create more affordable units in a co-located situation. Those are tools that exist. This is a separate tool that exists to try to achieve some attainable housing. It would not be the same income levels as MPDUs.
But no one would necessarily regulate it within the neighborhood.
Correct. It would not be regulated.
So how does that qualify as attainable? I mean,
well, I mean, I'll give you
however you want, right? However,
I mean, I can give you an example. There's a piece of property which 21 years ago maybe sold for $535,000. Today, if it was sold, it would be $1.4 million. If it was sold to someone who decided that they were going to do a duplex, they might have 2 units that would be $750,000 each. That is more attainable for that person 20 years ago who was buying $535,000 than trying to get to 1.4 or 1.5 billion. So the idea again is not that we're talking about inexpensive housing for people who are making 60% of the area median income. We're talking about, a couple wanting to buy a starter home in a community like Somerset and not being able to afford anything because it's over $1 million, and find opportunity to be able to.
Oh, I think she's frozen.
Like, was that me that's frozen? Okay, maybe
to get into the market.
It's some okay.
So the part of the zoning text amendment would possibly allow houses to be made into duplexes in Somerset as a possible thing, but there's really no guardrails on this attainable housing. So because in your example of someone, coming in and building the house and splitting it in 2, and maybe it's an easier entry point for someone, to come into Somerset, I think that the developers are going to, put in a Sub-Zero and, you name it, and try to sell, each one for 1.5. And there's nothing that says that they can't come in and do that.
That's true. And there's nothing that says they can't just do a tear down and build a bigger single family house either.
Yeah. So next door to me, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That it's the market, right? You can want 2.5 million for that duplex, but the market will bear what the market will bear, right? And so if it's half the land and it's half the size and whatever, it's not going to be twice the price, right? So the market will dictate that. And I think what they're doing is creating a scenario where the market would have to charge less than what you're saying. If you did it as a one big McMansion or whatever you want to call it, it would go for double or 2.5 or whatever. So it's more attainable. Is it, you know, it's affordable housing. Is it the world I live in? Not at all, but it's definitely more attainable than the $2.5 million house. And I think that's all they're saying.
And Somerset's a very unique area.
Yeah. Okay. I think that is all my questions.
Oh, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I realize that we're running over our time. I appreciate our panelists. I think the town manager has indicated there's only a couple of questions from the audience that haven't been covered. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, to be honest, the council addressed the vast majority of those questions that I got in. I think there's just really kind of one more broad question that we sort of touched on, and also understanding that the THRIVE versus some of these ZTAs that are specifically geared towards affordable and attainable housing are not the same thing necessarily, but that they are interrelated. And so maybe as a final question, I guess I was wondering maybe if all the panelists could give their 2 cents and say what are some of the things that you would like to see to ensure that single family neighborhoods like Somerset become more affordable?
In no more than 3 sentences. Gwen.
I think housing choice and diversity of housing types is how you get more affordability in even very expensive neighborhoods like Somerset. That's my simple message.
Thank you. Naomi.
I think ultimately natural market forces do it because neighborhoods come and go in popularity and appeal. I'm not sure, however, that in neighborhoods like Somerset or some others that have very high land values, there is a realistic way to do it without considerable government financial involvement in terms of either vouchers or subsidies or something like that. And I actually think that overall affordable housing depends tremendously on public funding or public-private investment.
Thank you, Rob.
I probably agree with the first two people. I mean, I think, and even though they may have disagreed, I think diversity, community to me is about diversity and diversity of people, diversity of income mix and all that. And then it gets reflected in the school system and the kids' interactions and all that. So I'm a big proponent of that. How you achieve that in the town of Somerset, I can't tell you, but but that's sort of my vision for you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Kim. You're muted. You're muted.
I would agree with Naomi, and I would go one step further and say that there's no plan that should be considered without the input of the community, period.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. We have learned an incredible amount tonight, especially how complicated this issue is. We are so blessed to have these 4 experts, Gwen, Naomi, Rob, and Kim. And we have advanced our knowledge a great deal. It's really only the beginning. And now we have one tool and many others to use as we continue to engage ourselves. We have all these opportunities coming up to engage on Thrive 2050 with the council, which we will let everybody know about. But the point is to educate, and then get engaged. So thank you, everyone. We will provide contact information for all of the experts so you can continue to educate yourselves, and we will move forward. And thank you everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.